Over to you, I think, Dominic.
Well, it's fabulous to be here. I've enjoyed particularly hearing the young people this morning. But now it looks like the spotlights are on us and we have to have a conversation. So I'd love to talk to you about speech bubbles, culture, creativity, arts, and I get the, some would say, unenviable task of talking about randomised controlled trials and research methodology as well. So do you want to start with telling us a bit about, speech bubbles? And
So I'm going to describe a drama programme that we do in schools that is being part of this Education Endowment Foundation research trial, looking at arts and education. It entirely connects with everything we talked about today, because what we've been hearing all the way is that the thriving child requires both youth voice, but also the teacher ear. So thanks very much, Darren, for that. But when I say the teacher ear, I'm going to talk about all the adults who work with the children, because it's more than just the teacher. So the programme that I run, which is now in 65 schools around the country, and one of our schools is here, which I'm very pleased with, is a collaborative project. And it was designed with teachers, it was designed with speech and language therapists, it was designed with educational psychologists. And it's for small groups of children, groups of 10 children at a time, 5 to 7-year-olds who have been referred with a communication need. And it just means that their communication skills means they're not quite thriving in the classroom, or they're not thriving in the playground. Maybe they haven't got as many friends as they would like to really have a great time at school. At the centre of the project is a child's own story, and one child stays behind at the end of each session and tells a story to the adult, and that adult scribes that story exactly as the child tells it. Many of you who've worked in early years will know this as maybe helicopter technique or play what you say. So it's a well-known technique. The thing that we do is really listen to the children. And sometimes when you're working with 5 to 7-year-olds, of course, it's not just the words you're listening to, but the whole person, their emotions, the way they're being. And I want to just tell you one short story from the project. This was a boy called Michael, name changed. Michael was in a school where there was a very distinct difference between the reception class and the year 1 class. It was a very open play, open space reception, and very, very formalised year 1. I think it's changed in that school now. Michael's not happy about this. It didn't quite work for Michael. And Michael, at the beginning of the year, was quite angry most of the time. And this was his story. I play music, I play jumping, I play Ben 10, I play Sonic, I play Power Rangers, I play games, I play jumping and racing, I play skipping, I play jumping, I play games. That was Michael's story. And he told it like that. What are you doing to me? He's saying, what's going on here? He didn't understand it at all. Communication and the thriving child. Some stats. 2/3 of pupils at risk of permanent exclusion have got an undiagnosed speech, language or communication need. 2/3. At least 60% of young people who are involved in the criminal justice system have a speech, language or communication need. And largely that has been unsupported. Young people referred to mental health services are 3 times as likely to have an unsupported speech, language and communication need. This leads to poorer outcomes academically and in life, as you can imagine. But there's something more than that about being a thriving person. Jules Witcher, who was this year awarded the Communication Champion and has a child who has a communication need, she said this: communication is more than wants, needs and choices. It's about humour, opinions, jokes. It's about complaining and manipulating, telling stories, protesting, relaying information and asking questions. It's about personality and connection. And I think that's what it is to be a thriving human being. And that's the project that's being researched by the Education Endowment Foundation.
Well, what I love about that is the sort of tangible, real voices of the children. I was once upon a time a primary school teacher, so I really empathise with those ideas. I've worked with younger children as well over the years, so it's fantastic. But of course, my interest now as a researcher is around the whole curriculum, and I've already heard people not too happy with England's curriculum, whether it is in primary or secondary. So the word language, of course, makes me think straight away about I'm going to start with England's national curriculum. I might say a bit more about other places later. And I want to ask the question, if, say, a primary child learns what a subordinate clause is that anything like what you're talking about? I mean, it's ridiculous. Why on earth do children need to learn what a subordinate clause is? What they need to do is they need to do the things I think that you're advocating, which is play with language, explore language, develop skills with language, and literacy, of course. They're both closely related. So in another talk, I would be saying, if you look at the curriculum for music, the national curriculum statements for music, just put English or language or literacy, replace the word music, and that would be a brilliant English curriculum for me. But I'll come back to curriculum. In terms of learning about culture, the research project, we think it's probably the biggest study of its kind worldwide. So it's 5 projects, it's 100 schools in each project, it's a randomized controlled trial for each project and an in-depth qualitative inquiry, or what we call a process evaluation. Clearly that takes a huge team, and I'm only one of that team, but I am taking some leadership around the process evaluation, so that's the in-depth qualitative inquiry, going into schools, drawing up case studies, meeting teachers. I was in Burnley last week, actually, watching some fabulous writing work with in a really deprived area, and a fantastic teacher and fantastic kids. So I'll talk more about the methods, but let's hear a bit more from you about the speech bubbles journey.
The research stuff is not, it's not my background. I went to drama school, so that's what I learned about. But I think we've gone on a research journey with this programme because clearly we could see that it was having a big impact, and what we wanted to do was to make sure that many, many more children could get access to this. So from the very beginning, we built it as a research programme. Initially, it was 18 Lewisham primary schools who called for this project. And that initial research and development trial was done by the Arts Council, and we worked with speech and language therapists to assess the programme. We moved on from there, and we did an action research project into just exactly which children would most benefit. We went on from there, and we worked with a wonderful guy called Dr. Jonathan Barnes, who some of you may know. Dr. Jonathan Barnes wrote a study into the programme, which he came into and spent 2 years in schools with us, really understanding it. And what that research did is it shifted us from one set of thinking, and that set of thinking was this is a programme that supports children communication, to really start to understand, because his expertise is in children's well-being, is to understand how those two things completely interplay. How we communicate affects how we feel, and how we feel affects how we communicate. And I'm sure if you think about that for yourself, that's as true for you as it is for the children we're working with. Dr. Jonathan Barnes' report is available on our website, and anybody could please go and read it. It's beautifully written. It describes the programme beautifully. What it doesn't do is it doesn't in any way give us a chance to compare that for children who haven't done speech bubbles. So we did a small group comparison study in 3 schools. University of East London supported us to do that. And that helped us to begin to understand what was the progress that a child who's getting speech bubbles, getting these 24 drama sessions, is going to get compared to a child who maybe for the same reasons could be referred but weren't referred. And what I started to understand about research, because it's not my background, was that what's really important, not only about what we do learn, about what we're doing well, but what we learn about what we're not impacting on. So the comparison group study did this great thing. So what I really understood now is, actually, when we do the programme, children get great benefits in understanding, using spoken language, storytelling and narrative, and social interaction. It makes absolutely no difference to their speech production. That's great to know that, because now I can go into a school and say, don't send a child to this programme because they've got a speech production issue. You might still send them because you want to build their confidence, but let's make sure that speech production issue has been supported in another way. And it's really powerful to know that stuff when you're doing the research. The RCT is a bit scary. So just at the moment, your team are out in the schools talking to the children and assessing their communication skills, assessing their social interaction. And I'm going to find out whether statistically significant the work I've been doing for the last 11 years has... But I know is making a difference to those children. But what I don't know is if that is statistically significant. And I don't know exactly what the academic benefits are. What's important also to understand is that there's a hierarchy in this research. So Dr. Jonathan Barnes' research, which is a beautiful paper and really helps you to understand the programme, should be, for me, read on a par with this amazing piece of randomised control trial and the statistical research that's going to come out. It should be read on a par. I'm concerned they won't be read on a par because we have a hierarchy of research. But we chose to do this project anyway. The only other thing I'd say is that what these will tell us, yes, it's statistical significance. It will give us a wider understanding. It will really help us to understand the impact this programme might have on children's reading, their communication and social skills. But there are still some limitations to that. And the limitations in this case are they're researching it right now. The children have only just finished. So my question is, what about if some of those benefits take a little bit longer to come out? And it won't tell us whether this is a sustained benefit. So my call to you is, can we have some more money so that in 2 years' time we can go back and chat to those kids?
If only I had the money, I'd give it to you, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Passionate proposal. I thought we were going to disagree, but actually I think we can reach agreement. Because researchers argue and debate all the time about the merits of particular designs or ways of approaching things. But I do think that if you want to know if an intervention is successful when measured against, admittedly, what some would regard as perhaps somewhat narrow measures, so it might be reading and writing, it might be mathematics, and yes, things like creativity are very much harder to analyse, so I shall be interested in the Durham Commission findings. But if you want to know if an intervention's successful, a randomised controlled trial is one of the most robust ways that we know in social science of doing it. Yes, it's full of problems and challenges, the measurement side, so you always have to have quite restricted tests that have been standardised. In some of the other interventions, we're looking at writing and measuring in a way that's acceptable in one of these studies. Measuring writing for very young children is really difficult, and there are very few measures, so it's really hard. But of course, it's hard for language as well. So I'm not kind of a zealot about randomised controlled trials. I think they have a particular purpose. And I would say the same thing about qualitative inquiry, which also has great strengths. And I absolutely hear the points that you're making about action research, about the depth of findings versus the breadth. But of course, qualitative inquiry also has a lot of limitations, not least the lone researcher going into a site and saying, well, I think it's like this. So, you know, we're used to this, and I hope we've reached a more mature stage as researchers where we can sort of say, yes, we might choose this method or that method or these combined methods. It's going to be full of limitations, but it will also have strengths. And perhaps the job for all of us is to work together. So, in another role, I'm soon to be president of the British Educational Research Association. BERA is passionate about trying to engage with practitioners around research, around problems that practitioners identify, and so on. So I think common ground is where we need to get, and I'll hold that common ground thought for when I come back to curriculum in a moment.
So just want to follow that up, that if you are an arts organisation here considering kind of that research journey, there's something that's worth kind of really bearing in mind, which is about what you know. Because when I was working with your team, well, actually not quite your team, is it? 'Cause it's
Behavioural Insights.
Behavioural Insights team. Yeah. They had great knowledge about building logic models and building the research programme. There were some limitations in their knowledge, but what I was, I suppose, and I was nervous about that, but what I was really pleased about was the way they were open about that. Yeah. So one of the questions we had was that they wanted to use a particular standardised test to check the children's communication development. And I just had some concerns that where the speech bubbles children start might mean that that test wasn't accessible to them. And it took a little bit of, I had to get a bit, you know,
artsy.
Artsy. Yeah. I get a bit artsy. Like that. But yeah, so then what we agreed they would do, and again, the school that's here, Grange Primary School, Tash is here. What Tash, who's been working with us for many years on the project, did, she said, it's all right, I'll make some Speech Bubbles kids available to them, and they can go in and trial the test. So we actually went in and trialled the test with those children. And we decided, actually, this works. It's going to be fine. So I think the thing to do is, if you're an arts organisation thinking about this journey, we need to do some of this research. We need to get better about being able to understand and convey what our projects do, what they don't do, and to use that research to improve them. And let's use our education partners, but let's challenge the researchers along the way. Let's make sure it is a collaboration and that we're working together to get the best out of each other.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
If we're on assessment, which we seem to be on,
okay.
I just want to come briefly to creativity because it's clearly what we're about today. My first research project was 50 schools, 25 secondaries, 25 primaries, and we were looking at creativity. And yes, we started with how do you define creativity, and we were looking at can you teach creativity. Skip forward many years, and I've just finished a period of 4 years looking at writing across the life course, actually, so a bit different from my usual stuff. But I think there are shared understandings of what creativity is. I think there are existing definitions. I was astonished to find some neuroscientists start a paper by saying, well, of course, we can't define creativity. In fact, we can't even define the word gene, you know, which seemed a bit odd. But then by the end of the introduction, they said, however, across loads of disciplines, we all know that it means new, of value, as judged by people looking at the creative act. So there are definitions out there, and I've certainly pursued that yet again. I think we've got about 2 minutes, so I think we need to set some challenges for us and the audience, perhaps.
I've got 2 challenges. One is Dr. Jonathan Barnes again, who I keep talking about. He talked about evaluating the twinkle in the eye of the child. So I want to know how we're going to do that next. And my other challenge is, if we don't do this research, and this is a challenge to all of those who are in our sector, if we don't do this research, if we don't gather this information, how are we going to get the resources to do more of this work?
Yeah. I'd like to say I'm really pleased that Kirsty Walt's here today. She probably won't remember, but I was on Newsnight arguing with Ruth Miskin about phonics about 10 years ago. And I also saw Kirsty on Newsnight last night talking about Scotland and Parliament and so on. It was really interesting. But what would I do to England? And the reason I'm talking about Scotland is because I think their curriculum for excellence is rather interesting. A birth to 18 curriculum developed through collaboration between researchers, teachers, policymakers. In England, what I would do is I'd take a bomb and I would drop it on the national curriculum. And I would start... Thank you. I would start a long-term collaborative process that crosses party political cycles to build and yes, young people would have to be involved genuinely in that, to build a national curriculum that we could be proud of, not one where the next government comes along and just throws away what the previous government did. Thank you. Thank you. All right, thanks very much.